Okay, tomorrow lab. We're doing lab number 10, and it's got two kind of different parts. The first part of the lab is kind of a medical microbiology exercise, and that consists of two components. One is everyone will do a skin swab, and we'll be plating that out on some selective and differential media that selects for staph bacteria. And particularly we want to see if we can get indication of whether you're a carrier for Staphylococcus aureus, where people just are natural carriers for that. And that's something that's helpful to know, particularly if you are in the potential medical profession. We're also going to do some throat and nasal swabs. You can do your own nasal swabs. Throat swabs, I know, are kind of unpleasant for people, particularly if you have a good gag reflex, I'll guide you. So you'll work with your lab partner on that. Initially, we're going to be plating out the throat and nasal swabs on some selective media that select for the growth of gram-positive bacteria and inhibit gram-negative. Because you've got this great mixed population in your oral and nasal cavities of gram-positives and gram-negatives, and we're more interested in gram-positives. So assuming that you get some gram-positives from your first round of growth on selective media, then we will then take those gram-positives and try to get a sense of what they are, and that will involve using some blood agar. That will also involve using some mannitol salt agar and a couple of other tests to allow you to start narrowing this down. I will try to have enough plates available for these media we're using in lab for you to use your unknown as well. And particularly if you have a gram-positive unknown, some of this media might be useful and helpful for you. And then the second part we're going to do is we're going to do motility tests. And there's two motility tests. There's one that involves just inoculating some media called motility test agar, and that's very straightforward. But then we're also going to do a visual observation of motility with a microscope by a technique called the hanging drop. And that is something that you will have to do on the lab exam. I'll tell you right now, there's going to be a microscope here and a microscope here, and there will be a culture, and you will have to do a hanging drop test. Show me your slide so I know that you can actually see it, and then report the motility or lack of motility in the organism. So we'll be pretty busy tomorrow. Things will calm down a little bit because you're going to have some time to follow up on this on Friday. There's no new lab on Friday. And then the week before break, we're going to do what will end up being an optional point lab. There's a lab on counting microorganisms and doing serial dilutions. Then we'll do a little bit of kind of preview for the lab exam, because you have a lab exam the Wednesday you come back from break. So we'll talk about that before you go. Okay. All right, we're in the process of talking about general chemicals that are effective, or maybe not quite as effective in some cases, in killing or inhibiting the growth of microorganisms. And we just finished talking about the phenolics. And so this particular slide is one of those summary slides that summarizes some of the different types of phenolic compounds, what their applications are, what some possible concerns or delivery considerations are. We did a lab, second week of class, on hand washing and disinfecting your countertops. And most of you saw that hand washing had some effect on the reducing the microbial population that you're carrying around in your skin. What is it about washing your hands that makes it effective at reducing microbial load on your skin? pH potentially, soaps tend to be a little bit alkaline, and change in pH can have an effect on the growth of microorganisms. As it turns out, that's a pretty minor effect, however. What else? What's about washing things is useful? Well, there's something in the antibacterial soap that we use. This guy right up here, this phenolic triclosan, And so antibacterial soaps typically have added compounds that help them to destroy microorganisms and retard their growth. But additionally, soaps belong to a category of molecules called surfactants. And the primary role that surfactants play is that they have an effect on cell membranes. One of the big things surfactants do is reduce the surface tension of the cell membrane, and that can destabilize it. Surfactants fall into two main categories. And the two major categories are soaps and detergents. One of the big distinctions between soaps and detergents are that soaps are anionic compounds, carry a net negative charge, and detergents are cationic compounds and carry a net positive charge. What is the surface of a bacterial cell? Is it a negative charge or a positive charge? Think about your staining procedures, okay? When we want to stain a cell, we use things like crystal violet or safranin. All of those particular stains are basic stains. They carry a net positive charge, which is attracted to the negative charge of the cell. Okay? So in some respects, soaps are kind of repelled by cell surfaces of bacteria. Detergents, on the other hand, tend to be attracted to those cell surfaces and therefore typically have much more robust interactions with the membranes. So here's a typical soap. Now this is showing the sodium salt of a soap, but typically these carry a net negative charge. And the primary function that soaps have is as wetting and cleansing agents to physically remove bacteria from the surfaces of your skin. Okay? So when you nice and suds up your hands with the soap, primarily that helps to just remove oils because they emulsify in the soap and any bacteria trapped in the oils, and then when you rinse your hands, you rinse those off. That particular process of physical removal from the surface of the skin is called degermination. Now, sometimes soaps are supplemented with antibacterial agents like triclosan. Or in the case of surgical soaps, it can be supplemented with something else we'll talk about later on, an iodine compound called betadine. Okay? But soaps themselves have very little antibacterial activity. Primarily, they are cleansing agents to remove dirts and oils and bacteria. There are a couple of soaps that have been supplemented with additional ingredients. I mentioned betadine. There's also a type of soap called green soap, which has alcohol mixed in it. And we'll talk a little bit about alcohols in terms of antibacterial activity. Or in the case of betadine, we can have iodine added to the soap. And this enhances their killing abilities. But soaps themselves are pretty lousy antimicrobial agents. If you take just a bottle of soap that's been sitting out for a long period of time, more than likely it will have bacteria growing in it, including Pseudomonas bacteria. And if you just plate that soap out on an agar plate, you'll usually get pretty robust growth on the surface of that plate. Now, on the other hand, detergents, which are cationic and carry a positive charge, have pretty good antibacterial properties. This is a particular type of detergent called a quaternary ammonium compound, or quat for short. And in the quaternary ammonium compounds, a positively charged nitrogen is part of this heterocyclic ring, which then attaches to this long hydrophobic tail that makes up the other part of the detergent. Okay, detergents have basically two functional parts, kind of like a phospholipid. They have this charged head, and then they have this uncharged hydrocarbon chain, this hydrophobic hydrocarbon chain. One of the things that detergents can do to cleanse is that they can form these balls, basically, where a bunch of detergent molecules arrange in such a way that the hydrophilic heads are exposed to the water out here, and the hydrophobic tails all cluster toward the interior of the ball. And dirt and grease can then become trapped in this hydrophobic interior, because grease is a fat, and that's hydrophobic as well. So when these structures form around dirt and grease, then when you wash the clothes, that washes those away. So you know what these structures are called? Those are called micelles. We think that that might be kind of how the first cell membranes originated, or by phospholipids forming these spherical ball-like structures. Quaternary ammonium compounds do something interesting. These particular surfactant molecules are attracted to the cell membrane and its negative charge, and they actually become inserted within the phospholipid bilayer itself. And what that does is it creates kind of an artificial channel, and it makes the membranes then very leaky and permeable. And if you make those membranes too leaky and permeable, that's going to disrupt cellular function, and that's going to kill the cell. So they really disrupt the cell membrane by physically interacting with it and inserting those molecules within the membrane itself. These surfactants also have some effect on inhibiting key enzymes within the cytoplasm of the cell. So there's kind of a dual role that these particular surfactant molecules play. Does anybody remember from freshman year this particular compound? Acetylpyridinium. Sound familiar? Okay, right now in Bio 134 they're doing something you did. They're doing the mouthwash. Remember the mouthwash experiment? We took the filter paper discs and we soaked them in various mouthwashes and we put them on the agar plates and saw whether there was a zone of inhibition around them. And we measured that. And we assumed that the size of the zone of inhibition was directly related to how effectively bacteria were killed by the chemical agent. Do you remember what most of you hypothesized originally would be the most effective of the mouthwashes we tried? The alcohol-based ones, like Listerine. Listerine had the most alcohol. And we actually had some alcohol-free mouthwashes that worked really well. And if you started looking through that list of ingredients, one of the things we ask you to do typically is to start narrowing down what ingredients are there in the ones that work well, and are they lacking in the ones that don't work well. And most of the time, the outcome of this particular lab, depending upon the mouthwashes you choose, is the active ingredient in the good mouthwashes is this compound, acetylpyridinium. It's a detergent. This detergent that's found in the mouthwashes is pretty highly antibacterial. So again, another summary slide kind of summarizing the difference between, in this case, quaternary ammonium compounds, which are detergents, and soaps. And each have their applications, but soaps applications are really pretty limited. Unless you supplement them, they don't give you much microbial inhibition. Well, since I introduced the concept of alcohol, let's talk about alcohols. Is alcohol antibacterial? Or what is your common sense of it? Isn't that why most of you hypothesize that high alcohol mouthwashes would have an antibacterial effect? Well, typically the results of this experiment that we do don't support that hypothesis. Does that mean the hypothesis was wrong? Possibly. But there's also another consideration anytime you get unexpected results, and that is your experimental setting. Okay? What more than likely is happening in that particular experiment is, yes, you soak the filter paper discs in the mouthwash containing alcohol, and it absorbs some alcohol. And you put it on the top of the Petri plate, and it starts to diffuse out into the surrounding agar and potentially killing the growth of the bacteria. But alcohols are very volatile, and particularly if you stick those Petri plates in a 37°C incubator to encourage the growth of bacteria, more than likely what's happening is most of the alcohol is evaporating before it really has a chance to do much good. Alcohol is an antibacterial agent. Okay? In concentrations above 50%, it dissolves membrane lipids. Alcohol also precipitates proteins and nucleic acids. It denatures them. Anybody ever isolated, done a simple DNA isolation? Warren McCombs does it with strawberries. What's one of the critical steps in that DNA isolation? Alcohol precipitation. Okay, add ethanol, and that precipitates the DNA, and then the DNA comes precipitating out as this kind of flocculent white stuff. And if you put a glass rod in there, you can actually twist out the DNA and get this slimy-looking stuff on your glass rod. That's DNA. Okay. What do we typically assume about the effect of concentration on killing power with chemical agents? What's the relationship? Greater concentration, greater or less killing power. Typically, and that's typically the way it is, greater the concentration, greater the killing power. Alcohols can be an exception to that rule. Actually, 70% alcohol is more effective at killing than 100%. There's a couple of reasons for that. One reason is that if you mix alcohol with a little bit of water, it actually penetrates the cells better than pure alcohol. And you got to get inside the cell to denature the proteins and nucleic acids. 100% alcohol tends to be have a dehydrating effect on cells, pulling water out of them. And denaturation depends upon the presence of some water. Remember we talked about endospores? We said that the low water content kind of protects the molecules from denaturation. And then this 30% water, again, helps to provide an environment where denaturation occurs more readily. Not all alcohols are effective as antimicrobial agents. The primary ones that are effective are ethanol and isopropyl alcohol. Methanol is a pretty lousy disinfecting agent. 70% isopropyl alcohol works really well. And it's sold in drugstores as a disinfecting agent. What's another name for 70% isopropyl? You know? Rubbing alcohol. Okay. You got to be a little bit careful with isopropyl. If you just use it occasionally, it's not a problem. But prolonged exposure to those vapors of isopropyl alcohol can have some neurological consequences. And so you don't want to be using this just all the time. But occasional use of this is not problematic. when they cleanse your skin prior to giving an injection, the effect that the alcohol is having in terms of killing bacteria really is pretty minimal. It's primarily that wipe with the alcohol in it is primarily serving as a determination agent to try to just cleanse the surface of the skin and remove oils, for example. So then when you punch that hypodermic into your skin, you're not pushing in bacteria that are normally part of the skin. By the way, have you gotten your flu shots? Some of you don't. Some of you still believe that flu shots cause flu, huh? We'll have to talk about that. We better not make those of us who got our flu vaccine sick, right? One class of compounds that's really among the most effective at being antimicrobial agents are the halogens. What are some halogenic compounds? Your periodic table. Fluorine, bromine, okay? And really, the one we'll spend the most time talking about is chlorine. Chlorine's been around for a long time. There's a lot of applications, different forms of chlorine. We'll talk about all of those. What context might you use fluorine? Fluoride. Like fluoridated water, fluoridated toothpaste. Okay. Fluorine can have some good antimicrobial effects, particularly on organisms that are part of biofilms. And that plaque that forms on your teeth is a biofilm. I think a lot of people feel like the purpose of fluorine really is to strengthen your enamel. Really, the primary purpose of fluorine is antibacterial activity against these biofilm bacteria. Bromine is also used sometimes. I know that my hot tub disinfectant are bromine tablets rather than chlorine. Bromine's a little bit more expensive. I'm not sure why they choose bromine versus chlorine in that particular system. A little bit harder to control, but evidently there are some instances where bromine is a little bit more appropriate than chlorine. But chlorine really is the big in terms of halogens. Chlorine can be disinfecting in the form of chlorine gas. Chlorine is also disinfecting in the form of hypochlorite. That is the active ingredient in bleach. And I also mentioned chloramines when we were talking about disinfection of water. In all three cases, what's critical is when you either bubble chlorine gas through water or dissolve hypochlorite in water or chloramines in water, they react and form an acid called hypochlorous acid. And that really is the agent that is antibacterial. Hypochloric acid is a pretty potent oxidizing agent. And one of the things that it tends to do is strip off hydrogens from sulfhydryl groups. Remember that a couple of your 20 amino acids have these sulfhydryl groups. And if we disrupt this sulfhydryl group, that can effectively denature proteins. These oxidizing agents can also break disulfide bonds. And disulfide bonds are important factors in maintaining the proper tertiary structure of proteins. So they help the protein to fold up the proper way. So these oxidizing agents really do a number on proteins and therefore destroy enzyme activity, which really influences cellular metabolism. I already mentioned the unfortunate interaction that chlorine compounds can have with organic matter, forming those trihalomethanes. We talked about that in the context of water purification. Also mentioned the fact that these chloramines have less of that tendency to interact with organic matter. And so they're a safer alternative for disinfection of water, but a much more expensive alternative as well. So oftentimes they're not used very much. Active ingredient in your sprays, the Clorox sprays that we're using for table disinfection, is hypochlorite. And Cl for Clorox, okay, indicates chlorine compound. So a lot of the cleaners will contain chlorine-based substances. Another halogen that's used not infrequently is iodine. The use of iodine as a disinfectant has been around since the early 1800s. It even precedes the use of chlorine. Iodine can also oxidize sulfhydryl groups. And it also specifically attaches to the amino acid tyrosine. And it forms a covalent bond with this particular amino acid. And when it does that, that messes up tertiary structure. Sometimes that's referred to as iodinating a protein. Okay? The iodine physically bonds with the proteins and destroys its tertiary structure. Iodine is much more stable in the presence of organic matter. It doesn't give you those nasty trihalomethanes compounds. It is a pretty effective antiseptic, so it can be used on skin. But tinctures of iodine, remember alcohol-based solutions or tinctures, can have an unfortunate side effect. Has anybody ever had a tincture of iodine put on a cut? Don't use assumptions. It stings, okay? It irritates nerve endings. If you combine iodine with a surfactant, a detergent, for example, then you form a new type of cleansing agent called an iodophore. And the nice thing about iodophores is they don't have that stinging property. Betadine, that surgical scrub, that brown surgical scrub that you've seen them also squirt onto wounds prior to incisions, okay, is an iodophore. Iodine can also be used for emergency disinfection of water. If you take 5 drops of tincture of iodine and put it in a quart of water and let it sit for about 30 minutes, that will disinfect the water. So backpackers used to use that a lot. Just grab a little bottle of tincture of iodine when you're out backpacking, squirt a little bit into your water, let it sit, and the water will be safe to drink. What's the downside? Doesn't taste very good, okay? It's got that nasty iodine taste to it. You know what backpackers primarily are using right now to replace iodine? Little tiny filtration devices, okay? Little filters that backpackers can carry around. And they've got just a little hand-drawn suction pump that pulls the water through a membrane filter, traps the bacteria in the water safe. And that's something important to know, is that even if water looks clean, and even if it looks pristine, it might just be coming out of a mountain spring, it can be contaminated with not only bacteria, but there's a very nasty intestinal parasite called Giardia. And that can be in even pristine looking water. And so you really shouldn't drink water out in the wild without at least filtering it first. We actually have some new devices. I don't know if Dr. Chapwan has ever shown one of these in his water quality research, but they've actually got little straws now. You can just drink out of polluted water. And the straws have filtering and antibacterial materials in them, and you can literally just suck up water from a really nasty source, and what comes through the straw is safe for drinking. See one of those? Yeah, pretty cool. This particular slide illustrates something interesting. Called oligodynamic action. Oligodynamic action refers to something being antimicrobial even in very small amounts. Tiny amounts can be antimicrobial. And what are they showing here? They're showing the oligodynamic action of some various heavy metals on this particular slide. Gold, silver, mercury, copper, all exhibit oligodynamic action. Here you can see a little piece of gold foil, here a piece of silver amalgam. And again, like those mouthwash plates you did, if you place these particular objects on the surface of a seated plate and then incubate it, you'll get a zone of inhibition as a result of the effects of that heavy metal on bacterial growth. And again, these heavy metals typically work by covalently bonding to proteins, and particularly denaturing enzymes as a result of forming those particular covalent bonds. Cadmium, arsenic, or other heavy metals. And what do we think of those as being? They're toxins, right? They exhibit their toxicity by denaturing proteins and chemically binding with the proteins. Yeah.
Since it's a physical interaction with bacteria, why would there be this halo around the silver to the gold?
Because those little ions can actually diffuse out of and away from the metal compound. Okay. Yeah, you don't normally think of those metallic ions as diffusing, but they can through the augment. Probably from a medical standpoint, the heavy metal that has been used most significantly is silver. And here you can see that there are several forms of silver that are highlighted in this particular slide. Silver sulfadenosine ointment, silver nitrate, metallic silver, and colloidal silver. Silver nitrate used to be used in drops that were placed in infants' eyes following birth. Remember why I said they did that? This was to try to prevent particularly infections of infants' eyes passing through the birth canal of a mother who was carrying an undiagnosed STD. And one of the undiagnosed STDs that's most this one is silver nitrate drops were painful. I think we talked about the fact that if you give silver nitrate on your skin, it burns. So you can imagine a little infant having these drops of silver nitrate putting in their eyes. So this process has primarily been replaced by antibiotics instead. Erythromycin is used more. We use this sulfur silver ointment as a dressing for treating burn victims. One of the real issues with burns is compromising your skin. And your skin is a very effective barrier, if it's intact, for destroying, keeping microorganisms from getting in and penetrating through your tissues. If the skin becomes compromised, as it does to burn, then all bets are off. And so putting these kind of gauze pads impregnated with this sulfa and silver ointment, we'll talk about sulfa later on, is pretty effective in trying to retard burn infections. Burn infections are really, really nasty. One of the organisms that is particularly problematic for a burn victim is a form of bacteria called Pseudomonas aeruginosa. Curious, sometime we've got some plates of that. And one of the things that the Pseudomonas does is secretes green pigment into the surrounding agar. And so burn victims that have pseudomonal infections, when they cover the burn up with gauze, the gauze will literally turn green as a result of these secreted pigments that the Pseudomonas are producing. Pretty nasty stuff. Metallic silver is sometimes impregnated into medical devices like catheters, particularly if those devices are going to be reused again. Mercury used to be used a fair amount as a disinfectant. There are a couple of over-the-counter mercury antiseptics. Mercurochrome and methylate. And these are mercury tinctures. And if you'd looked probably in your parents' medicine cabinet when they were growing up, there probably would have been, in addition to bottles of tincture of iodine, some mercurochrome and some methylate. What's the problem with mercury compounds? Toxicity. Okay. So really, we're really trying to get away from using mercury-based compounds. The mercury-based compound that's probably received the most attention within the last decade is thimerosal. And that is a mercury compound that used to be used very routinely in vaccine preservation. What's the concern about thimerosal in vaccines? Some people believe that vaccines cause what? Autism. Okay. And that's been a particularly difficult nut to crack. There was actually one paper published in England about a decade ago which purported to show a clear relationship between vaccines and autism. That paper was totally discredited. And it was found to have just significant flaws in methodology. And yet the anti-vaxxers are still adamant about this relationship. They say there is a cause and effect relationship because as we vaccinated more, autism has gone up more. They don't really understand the relationship or the difference between correlation and causation. Okay. But as a preventative, they've started pretty much removing thimerosal as any use of preservative agents in vaccines. There are a couple of vaccines that still require thimerosal as a preservative, although I believe you can even request special versions that are thimerosal free. Mercury is nasty, there's no doubt about it. Okay? And we're really going away from using mercury very much in antisepsis. Copper has some interesting antimicrobial properties. One of the biggest is that copper in higher concentrations tends to pretty effectively inhibit photosynthesis. If you've ever seen an old farm pond, that has become scummed over with algae and bacteria and has this green scum on it. One of the common treatments for that is throw some copper sulfate in that water, and the copper will kill the microorganisms. The problem with that particular treatment is what oftentimes happens is the dead algae and bacteria settle to the bottom of the pond, and then the decomposing bacteria break it down and use up all the oxygen. So then the oxygen becomes depleted in the water, and then that kills all the fish. So sometimes the treatment is really kind of worse overall than the original effect. There are a variety of acids and bases that can be used in disinfection. And obviously, the mechanism of these particular compounds' action is by altering pH. That can then have an effect on protein structure. Probably one of the most widely used basic compounds for cleaning is ammonium hydroxide. And you'll see that a lot in various floor cleaners. Be really careful. Sometimes people will think, hey, I'm going to make a nice cleaning compound by mixing bleach and ammonium hydroxide. Maddie, you're chuckling. What do you get? Yeah, you get some strong ammonia gas, and it literally can overwhelm you. Knock you out, yep. So don't mix bleach and ammonium hydroxide. Oh, yeah?
Well, it's actually really sad. They were trying to get rid of the mold problem. They wanted to put chemical stuff. Not a good idea.
Yeah. Well, that happens too. People will use muriatic acid, which is basically hydrochloric acid, for trying to clean wells. And sometimes the fumes of the muriatic acid will overwhelm them, and you've heard about people dying trying to clean their wells with muriatic acid. It's not the kind of thing you should take lightly. One of the limiting factors oftentimes of the use of acids and bases is their corrosive nature. Okay? Now, there is some application of particularly acidic compounds in the food industry. One of the older forms of food preservation is pickling. What kind of acid do you use in pickling, you know? Vinegar or acetic acid, okay? That's also the case in sauerkraut, or the Asian version of sauerkraut, kimchi. If you start looking in the grocery store at packaged foods particularly, oftentimes they are loaded with various preservatives, many of them which are acidic compounds. Benzoic acid, propionic acid. I find propionic acid a lot in bread. So if the bread isn't fresh, it's intended to have a long shelf life. They add propionic acid to it. Very significant difference in the shelf life of fresh baked bread and preserved bread. And fresh baked bread doesn't last very long. Propionic acid and other preservatives in packaged bread, it has a pretty long shelf life. It's pretty amazing. So if you ever want to be kind of amazed sometimes, start looking at your labeling of various food packages in the grocery store and seeing all of the food additives, and many of these are intended to be food preservatives. The food preservative industry is a multi-billion-dollar-a-year industry. And there are real questions about health risks associated with consuming some of these preservatives. Okay, that's actually probably a pretty good place to stop. We've got a couple of other things to talk about, some oxidizing agents, some aldehydes, peroxides. So we'll wrap that up on Thursday, and then that will represent the ending material for the exam on Monday. We'll continue on with new material on Thursday and start talking about chemotherapeutic agents, we'll get into antibiotics, some of the sulfa drugs and things like that. But I'll make sure that I tell you specifically. On the study guide for the growth chapter, we had a part of that on the last exam. Remember we went through the counting methods? So I think that covers like the first 4 or 5 questions of the growth study guide. So it's really only the stuff that starts talking about environmental influences like temperature, pH, median, stuff like that, that are the relevant materials for this upcoming exam. And then we will have covered all of the study guides for metabolism and for these chemical control methods. Okay? So come ready to do throat swaps tomorrow. Yum, yum.
Browder. Did you see the study that was published back in September about how they found antibacterial soap is really no much better than regular soap? Because
I've seen some of those studies, yeah. Well,
this one,
they're developed, yeah, microorganisms are developing high-level resistance to triclosan. That's the big
right,
problem.
and this one, they tested 20 bacterial strains and just exposed it to plain soap and antibacterial soap. They found that you have to expose the antibacterial, or you have to expose the bacteria for 9 hours for it to have any effect different than regular.
Washing your hands for 9 hours.
That's a little bit extreme.
Well, yeah, and I mean, and people just in general have become so obsessed about destroying microorganisms that, you know, there are instances, like in this lab, I think it's a good idea to use antibacterial soap, if it's even doing any good.
Right.
Because you're just exposed to so many things you might normally not see. But around your house, I mean, come on. I mean, you don't need it. And it.
Yeah. The other thing is somebody said that triclosan kills good skin flora too.
Oh, absolutely.
Which,
absolutely.
You know, just regular soap just washes away the dirt and
Yep.
grease, so there's
Yep.
no reason to use the antibacterial soap.
Yeah.
The FDA, like, I think it'll only be a few years before the FDA is like, you probably can't have that anymore.
I think you're probably right.
It's fascinating stuff.
Microorganisms are just amazing in their ability to circumvent our attempts to destroy them.
Yeah.
Professor of biology. Dr. Browder,
Yes.
if it's asking the college or university of Morton McCombs, like this for a secondary application, and like
Say that again, I'm sorry.
it's asking for the college / university of, so I have to like fill out all this information about the letters of recommendation, like the people that wrote those for me. So for Morton McCombs, would I put Notre Dame or would I put her undergrad?
Oh, no, you put Franklin College.
Oh, put like
Oh,
where
where?
she's working.
I assume so, yeah. Yeah, they don't care where she got her degree. Yeah, they want to know the context in which she's evaluating you.
Oh, okay. So then the street and everything would just be Franklin's.
Yes, 101 Brannigan.
Okay. So then for Dr. Dana, would I do his practice?
Yes. And Natalie might have that information, or you could email him and say,
Yeah, I emailed him and asked him because I thought it was like all personal stuff.
yeah.
So like his college would be like where he actually graduated, like NOVA, right?
Yes. So they want to know college and university of your, let me see,
Yeah.
of your recommenders?
Yeah.
Is this for a deal, or is this for?
Yeah, letters of recommendation and it's like you're also a position.
Oh, well, okay, well then I take it back.
You would think though for like the engineers and
So for the osteopathic physician, yes, definitely no. Okay. But here, pre-medical committee or whatever, yes, it would be Franklin College for this.
Okay. So then it's supposed to be.
But they basically want to know where your osteopathic physician went to medical school, I think. That's
Okay.
my interpretation.
So then would the street be his practice address or the address of the school or his
I,
home address? Or?
I'm assuming if if it's following college, that it's the address of Nova. You might double check with Morton McCombs and see if she's encountered this. Because this is these forms are new forms for.
Yeah. They take
DO school.
forever.
Because before you just wrote a letter,
Yeah.
and sent it to. But I would assume that would be Nova's address because. Scroll back. Oh, so if it's contact information, then so go back down. So they want to know where he went. And so that would be Nova, but then it's correct contact information.
Not email.
Yes. Because if they want to get a hold of him, it doesn't do them any good to have Nova's address.
Right. Yeah. That's true.
And then for Combs, yes, Frank Combs.
Okay. So her street address, would I just use the school or should I
Yeah,
ask her?
yeah. Because they would send something probably to the school. I don't think they ever